know that you're asking us to be a board of directors. And you know that that means that any questions have to be in that voice and role that you ask in the 20-minute. You can step out of role in the last 10 minutes when we give them pointers for how to be brilliantly successful, continually brilliantly successful in their 10 minutes. All right, so this is to you all, no surprises. In this part of the competition, you're taking on a fictional business identity, and you've assigned us the identity of board of directors. You will have the 30 minutes because you chose that over the 25 plus 5, right? Mm-hmm. So one of you probably wants to pay attention to when it gets to be close to that, so that because you won't have the buffer at your choice. You will be uninterrupted by us. You will get to perform your whole thing. When you're finished, we're going to ask you questions, as you heard me say, designed to help you be that much more effective in the 10-minute. So if you left issues on the table that we think you need to know, you need to have feedback from us on in order to be especially competitive in the 10-minute, we'll focus on that.
Okay. If
we have concerns about something, you'll know it, and you'll have a chance to, in that time, think about how you incorporate or not that into your 10-minute. This is all about how to help you for the next level. You know that anything that you talk about, especially ethics, needs to be described in simple, practical, common sense language. No jargon. I hope that's not my phone. It is.
Maybe it is.
I apologize. I have a parent in the hospital, so I apologize that was the way I kept it on, and that was a call. Okay, so and absolutely no technical, philosophical jargon language. Any member of the team who reads his or her part, it will harm the rest of the approach, because you're really showing up as consultants. You can certainly use notes, and each one of you, as you know, has to have a speaking role. With that, I look forward to figuring out how to start this.
You let me know when you click, and I'll click too, and then we can start.
You want to say 3, and I'll give it my best shot?
All right, 3, 2, 1, click. All right, we're good to go.
Oh.
You didn't get it?
Uh-oh. Is he getting it? No, because it's supposed to be 31. All right, this is horrible. Why couldn't you have had the
If you want, I can use my cell phone.
No.
Are you sure?
Okay, I'm
no
use
technology, sorry.
This is totally despicable. I'm sorry, I don't mean to interrupt your...
It's fine.
Why don't we trade?
Sure.
I'll take yours and you figure mine out, because you are so good at what you just did. And now I have to get this back to 0.
Are you good? Yeah, I got it. Oh, you did.
Oh, that's nice.
You should have waited like 30 seconds to say that.
That is so nice. You know, I really appreciate that.
Sorry.
No, don't think that that's going to come against the team. Don't think that for a minute. Okay.
All right. And 3, 2, 1, click. Hello, everybody. My name is Ann Brewer, and these are my colleagues.
Bob Juliana.
Matthew Simpson.
Alicia Pshenichny.
And we are Delphic Consulting Group. Thank you so much for inviting us in to talk to you today about your company. So as you know, Uber, or formerly Uber Cab, was formed in 2009 with a philosophy striving to do better car service. German is the language that Uber was derived from, so that can be translated to mean superiority. Similarly, the German philosopher Nietzsche developed a concept known as Übermensch, which can be kind of understood as striving to become to a higher level of morality. So our goal here as Delphic is to help you achieve this mutual advancement of those two concepts. Excuse me. So as we're here today, we're going to walk you through our presentation. And so to start, we'll be going over what we think Uber is doing well and where we see areas of improvement. Following that, we'll be discussing our solutions from a multidimensional perspective. And following that, we'll be discussing our impact of those solutions on your company and the environment in which you operate. Also, just to note, we will be discussing the ethical implications that our impacts will have on your company so that you're aware going forward as you look for further success?
To begin, we would like to give you a short background of your company before going through what you're doing well. So as you know, it was founded by Travis Kalanick and Garrett Camp in 2009. And it was based on just a simple idea of making the taxi cab industry more efficient. They recognized the problem. They were in France, they wanted a taxi, and they realized it was wholly inefficient. And the regulated system wasn't promoting a free market, and they were struggling to find a way to get from point A to point B in an efficient manner. So they came up with a brilliant idea. Let's promote a free market economy. He was a disruptor. Travis Kalanick saw a problem and recognized it and made a solution. Behind every organization is an individual who defines that organization and the goals it has for the future. While Travis Kalanick has been described as combative or a disruptor, we want you to keep in mind that he is also a highly innovative individual that is going to bring your organization forward. But we feel with keeping these innovations in mind, we can make it even better.
Well, now that we have given you a little overview of the presentation as well as a little background on Uber, we would like to discuss some of the successes you've had thus far. Now, Uber has truly streamlined and revolutionized the industry that could best be described as antiquated and inefficient. In its place, it has left an industry that is truly new, revolutionary, and built for the 21st century. Now, in addition, they have, Uber, in their new model, has created and done away with the point of purchase transaction, where you can now link the rider and the driver and allow them to easily, quickly communicate, get together, be on their way, and afterwards remove the cash transaction that takes place. In addition, Uber has done great measures with their safety to greatly weed out unprofessional drivers and bring a safe environment to the retail industry. Aside from these successes, Uber has made advancements based on their business model and the success of the company as a whole. Some of these side effects from Uber have been a possible decline in urban areas for the use of personal vehicles, as accessibility has increased so much and so dramatically because of the technological aspect of it. Along with possible less cars and less drivers because of the utilization of Uber, we are seeing potential declines in pollution and waste, as well as a reductance in drunk driving. Now, despite these successes that Uber has had, there are still some problem areas, particularly in a company that is 6 years old and growing as rapidly as Uber is. Now, these areas we feel can be broken down into 3 separate tranches. Although they are diverse, these fit them very well. Those being the regulatory environment surrounding Uber, Uber's business model, and finally their corporate behavior as a whole. Now, although we have it broken down into 3 tranches here, we would like you to think of it in more of a comprehensive manner, as all 3 of these truly relate to one another and they affect one another going forward. As you can see here, oh, there you go. Now, Uber is streamlining and redefining the industry. And by doing so, it has broken down the barrier that has existed between technology and the car service. Now, in addition to this, these 3 areas are broken down and, as I said, interrelated.
Okay, so to start with, we're going to focus on the first problem area, which is the regulatory environment. We're going to start with that because of the external factors that are going to drive Uber moving forward. As you know, the taxi industry is highly regulated and highly intertwined with the government systems across the world. For that reason, there is a lot of regulation trying to keep Uber from moving in. The government and the taxi cab industry has a real interest in keeping things the way they are. Whereas Uber, like Travis Kalanick, is a disruptor. They come in and want to change things, change the way it operates. First thing we're going to focus on is labor disputes in the regulatory environment. Obviously, there is a debate over whether the driver is a contractor or an employee, and this has caused a great deal of labor dispute between Uber and their drivers. Ultimately, Uber's present business model treats the drivers as purely contractors. They do not provide the resources, dictate the hours. That individual is a self-operating entrepreneur. This is the basis of the sharing industry and also the basis of Uber's business model. A recent court case, however, is trying to change that. Barbara Berwick in California sued Uber claiming that she was in fact an employee. California agreed. Uber was forced to repay her operating expenses, and it was potentially going to change the landscape for Uber as a company. Ultimately, Uber appealed the decision and is fighting similar court cases across the country. So we would like to recognize that this trend of the employee versus contractor debate is something that Uber must preemptively recognize so that they can take steps to avoid it in the future before it reaches the national level and the government tries to shut down Uber entirely. Next, we want to go over safety concerns, which is an obvious issue for passengers that are using Uber across the world. We're going to address this from the perspective of just the passenger and their physical harm, as well as the liability stemming from an injury. Start, obviously, passengers are concerned with safety. It is the basis for the sharing economy. You want to trust that that individual will get you from point A to point B in a safe manner. And Uber advertises that they're the leader in background checks. So you assume that that individual you're getting in a car with is not going to harm you. Unfortunately, they were sued for this as well, as they claimed that they were the leader in background checks, and individuals argued that they were in fact not the leader in the industry. Uber had to remove the slogan, which brought to national attention that they may not be doing the protocol they had advertised. In addition, the recent Kalamazoo shooting, where 6 individuals were killed while an individual still picked up Uber passengers across the state of California, threw another wrench in the idea that Uber was entirely safe. Uber took the protocol necessary according to the status quo, but the nation still saw Uber driver kill 6, and again, public perception of Uber as an unsafe and unregulated industry, again, was brought up, which is problematic for the company. Finally, we're going to move on to conflict with governments. This is obviously a clear issue considering the map we show above, where Uber is suspended operations in certain areas due to government regulation. They're partially banned or fully banned in parts of the world. Uber's present business model was move into a marketplace, create demand, and then fight the government. They fight the government, then move in. They moved in first to build a consumer base and make sure that the individuals supported them moving forward. While we understand this has worked, we want to recognize that this creates more enemies than it does solutions. And the fact that although Travis views this as the proper way to move into a market, it can ultimately impact the company by creating enemies across the world. And that's something we want to avoid.
Now, in order to better understand the business model of Uber, it's important to understand the factors that affect it. Starting off, diversification is a factor that many companies wish to attain because it mitigates risk. Now, at the same time, we have noticed that Uber does not have that much diversification yet, but we would like to change that. For example, if there were any legislative changes, would Uber be able to keep up with them and not have to change as a business overall? Take, for example, Amazon. It started off in a small market of online book sales and has grown since then to become the Amazon that we know today. We want that to happen to Uber as well. Furthermore, customer loyalty is very important. Now, customers are what drives the business, and therefore we need their loyalty. However, we actually took a survey in the Philadelphia area, and we asked individuals, both men and women, and we asked them one question. If you had to choose between Lyft and Uber, what would be one factor that would make your decision? 17 out of 20 of those individuals said price. That clearly determines that there's a lack of customer loyalty there. That's a problem. That goes on with the market density, because clearly there are more, as we have been adding more throughout this presentation, more competitors, and it's a growing market. There's a high demand, but if there's more competition, that obviously means that Uber has to stand out more and do more to stand out and to differentiate itself. Now, we know that Uber has been a part of the pickup and delivery service recently, and we're a big fan of that. However, we want to grow that even more and expand it to possibly partner up with either certain airlines or hotel services in order to offer discount rates in the future. Now, one major competitor recently who came out is called Chariot. Now, Chariot offers the same service as Uber, but it's strictly for women. Clearly, there was a problem because women feel the need to have their own service. There's a problem, and we need to address it and make sure that Uber does grow and expand and value its customers in that aspect.
So next we're going to move away from the business model and focus a little bit more on the public image of your company. So as they come up on the screen, here are some different things that we're going to be focusing on in this particular segment. In the market, Uber often is described as being innovative, but that's not the only thing that people have been describing them as. For instance, words like combative, aggressive, argumentative have been thrown at them and kind of tagged along. They may think that the market may think that this type of mindset is necessary to compete in such a growing market. However, we believe as a consultant group that you're able to accommodate all the needs of your drivers, your regulators, as well as the market and the media, and still be able to reach all of your goals. So the first one is we would like to discuss is strange driver relationships, which has recently come to light as drivers have been contacting you in regards to issues with registration, with licenses, and then we also have with general prices. The main issue with that is they are beginning to feel very frustrated with management because they feel like they aren't being heard. And they're afraid as this frustration grows, as their issues aren't being recognized, they'll no longer be able to profit as much as they have been. So it's about keeping that relationship strong. Next, we'd like to discuss is your relationship with the regulators. In the past few years, regulators such as governments and politicians have really been waging a war against your company, in the sense that they don't want to have that legislation in any particular areas. They're feeling very competitive towards it, especially in big cities where there are taxi companies. Despite this, while you do have the opportunity to open that pathway of communication, there have been no attempts. Instead, we've noticed trends of shutting off the communication and rather just operating where bans are already in place, which is quite illegal. Next, we're going to discuss the handling of privacy data. In the news, Uber, your company, has admitted to using GodView, which is a tool that allows your drivers to be able to see the most recent location of your users at any time. So this revelation really is concerning to the consumers because they want to have that safety aspect. In light of Facebook's most recent privacy issues, it's really important to note as the board of directors that no matter how secure you think you are in the market, if you start to tamper with people's trust, then we're going to have an issue of that trust getting lost and the consumers turning to another company. Lastly, an overarching theme of corporate behavior is your little emphasis on public image. For example, recently in the news, one of the senior vice presidents of your company spoke out negatively against a reporter, claiming that he would release private information against her if she published anything in the news that was against Uber. Having that relationship may seem negative, and it is, because Uber is starting to portray this feeling of invincibility as they're growing in their market. However, with that feeling, it's important to remember that there were plenty of companies at the turn of the millennium that experienced that same surge of growth and that confidence, and now they can only be found in textbooks.
Now, while these problems may seem large and insurmountable, we believe that there is a solution. And ultimately, we believe that solution can be boiled down to one overarching concept. We believe that concept is relationships. Uber, to provide a solution to these problems and move forward in the future, needs to build, develop, and maintain their relationships. Build them where they don't have them, develop them where they're weak and frail, and maintain them going forward. Currently, Uber, and through their tactics, has been acting almost in an alienating manner. They're alienating all of these related parties, and that's going to lead to future decline instead of cooperation and progress. Uber, as a young company, and experiencing the growth that it has, needs to learn how to pick their battles, when to pick their battles, but they need to learn how to listen. Now, we believe that the problems that they're facing with their drivers, the true value drivers of the business, can be solved fairly easily, without any altercation to the business model that is in place and is so critical to the success of Uber. We recognize that there have been lawsuits, and there's already been rulings in California and Oregon that have changed the status of these drivers to employees. Categorizing these drivers as employees is unsustainable for Uber and their business model. Now, we believe your argument against this is strong. Currently, you do not dictate the hours of employment for your hours of work for your clients, or drivers rather, and you do not dictate the resources that they control and own, their cars. We believe Uber is a company that is a technological infrastructure. We view Uber as a market. Similar to how the Dow Jones links traders and investors, Uber is the marketplace of riders and drivers. And in both instances, you would not consider these these drivers as employees. Now, in addition to the employee matter, there's a financial cost to doing so. In California alone, where they've ruled that they are employees, there's some 45,000 Uber drivers. And if you were to convert all of these to employees with taxes and additional costs, it would grow to about $200 million additionally per year. Ultimately, a cost such as this is unsustainable at this point in your business. Now, Uber needs to address this, and they need to focus on their relationships. Now, aside from the problems that drivers have with employment, they also have other minor grievances with Uber, such as not being reimbursed for tolls. But as a whole, the drivers are very happy with Uber, and they want to continue driving with you. For Uber to continue their success, they need to focus on these drivers, and they need to work out viable compromises. Some compromises could be creating creating a system in which the drivers are incentivized to do better, based on things such as rider ratings and continued performance of the driver and their activity. There should be incentives that allow them to grow and maintain and work and advance. These incentives could be dividends, bonuses, and even changing the rates and the reward that they get per ride. Now, we understand that Uber wants low fares to increase their market share, as that is really, quantity is important to Uber. However, the one asset that you have and one factor that will distinguish you from other companies is your drivers. You need to make them happy, which will then make the customers happy, which will keep them all coming back to you. And aside from this point, one other aspect that needs to be addressed in terms of the drivers is insurance. We believe that Uber should work with insurance companies to create some sort of package with corporate and personal insurance so that the drivers are adequately covered at all points.
Moving away from value drivers, even though that is a huge part of our solution, we'd like to touch upon safety because we feel that's a huge part in your customer base. In order to address this issue of safety that Uber's been facing in the past few months, we believe that it should be mandatory for all drivers to get annual background checks as well as drug tests. This is to ensure that they're holding themselves responsible in the act of being a driver, but also to ensure your customers, that their drivers are being held to the utmost liability. Second, we believe that the drivers, should have to go through a mandated free trial service in order to be trained on how to properly be an Uber driver, as well as to make sure that they are aware of their obligations to the community. And lastly, we believe that the drivers should be fired immediately in the case of any accusation of crime. This goes back to that building that customer relationship, because if the customers don't feel safe, then we don't have a business.
So now that we've addressed the physical safety of the individual, we would also like to talk about the privacy that consumer is entitled to. Now, Uber is an international corporation, and they clearly have interest all over the world. Cultures vary in their perceptions of privacy, but one thing is common, that people do value their privacy. And Uber has a history of mishandling data and feeling as though they can do whatever they want with it. And this changes that relationship and changes that trust that is underpinning the sharing economy. So we believe there needs to be a top-down change in the culture of privacy at Uber, and that must start with management. Ultimately, lower-level employees will not view privacy in the same manner if top-level employees like Travis Kalanick, your CEO, articulate views on God view that they view it as normal. And clearly, that type of behavior is not normal. People think it's problematic and will stop using the service altogether. In addition, we also want to protect the privacy of the passenger when the driver drops them off. There were times when drivers would have access to passenger information after the drop-off. And when the passenger found out about that, they would feel that they were in danger from that driver, or that the driver knows where they dropped them off, their information, they can know their credit card number, things like that. Clearly, that is not sustainable. The driver should only know the information, only know the first name and the last 4 digits of the card number from when they pick them up to when they drop them off, and the relationship is over. That is it. That is the only way to protect the privacy of the consumer and keep everyone feeling as though there is trust underpinning this relationship. For us, privacy is huge in this data-driven economy. And if Uber is simply providing an infrastructure, they need to be really protective of how they use their data and how they're perceived in the overall marketplace. Finally, we want to emphasize customer service. This is something also huge for Uber that kind of goes in line with their privacy, their safety, and their values, and how they value their drivers. Ultimately, right now, Uber has an F according to the Better Business Bureau for customer service, which is clearly problematic. They are perceived that they are not responsive to the demands of their passengers. When they have a problem, they don't immediately come back to them, they don't make changes, they don't make fixes. So you have one bad experience, it's not just you're going to have a bad experience, you're going to tell others about that bad experience. 6 degrees of separation will say that that individual and individuals around them will no longer use the service. And as we have pointed out, there is so much competition in this marketplace, this new market, that one bad experience could drive someone to Lyft or any of the other services that are immediately being offered. So Uber must also revamp their customer relationship program and customer service program to ensure they are actively responding to both their drivers and passengers. In addition, a customer loyalty program needs to be built. My experience as an avid coffee drinker, I understand that Starbucks has a wonderful loyalty program that keeps me coming back. I think it would be a great way to differentiate Uber if they installed a similar loyalty program, where for every certain number of rides, such as 12 to 15, you would get a free ride. Ultimately, such loyalty creates an economic moat and differentiates Uber from their competition. You'll be more willing to go back to Uber and won't think just about price if you think I'm only 3 rides away from a free ride. That type of loyalty will keep consumers coming back long after your other competitors have disappeared entirely. And that's what we want to emphasize. We want this to be a long-term solution, and we feel like if some of the money from advertising was allocated towards this loyalty program, it would be a great investment for your company overall.
Now, as the management, we want you to know that it's not very difficult nor expensive to implement these changes, especially in light of the profits that the company earns. However, any company likes to make sure that its stakeholders are all happy, but it needs to be done in an ethical fashion. The stakeholders for Uber are the shareholders, the customers, and the drivers. Now, we actually got the chance to speak to a couple of drivers and ask their opinions. Now, they had a lot of positive feedback about the company, but there were 2 alarming factors that we did notice. One, when an Uber driver registers his or her car, that car is never checked up on. What if those brakes are broken? What if they go out on a drive that day with a customer and they get into an accident? Who's held liable in that case? Secondly, a lot of Uber drivers work full-time jobs and then do Uber on the side, or they just do Uber full-time. A lot of them are exhausted, work exhaustingly long hours, and are driving during that exhaustion. Right now, Uber has no regulation on the amount of hours that drivers are allowed to work under. So technically, a driver could work 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year, and nobody would ever know or be alerted. Now, those are alarming, and the customers notice those factors. They notice that, and that's why they rate the driver either positively or negatively. Now, if those problems are changed, the drivers will ultimately be happier and the customers. Therefore, the investors and the shareholders would be happier because they would see the positive feedback and get that positive feedback and therefore reinvest in the company. We must ensure that all legal and that everything in legality is also addressed and that we follow all regulations and rules. So we would like to thank you for taking the time to listen to our plans for the future of Uber. We want you to understand that we believe that Uber is a successful company and has done tremendous things and will continue to do so in the future. We simply want it to be growing and expanding and becoming the major source within the market, because it already is according to valuation, but its competitors are leading upwards. So we would like Uber to grow and achieve long-term growth and sustainability while acting in an ethical fashion. We thank you very much. Are there any questions?
Thank you very much. I'd like to know what Uber drivers' responsibility is. What drivers who drive for Uber, and therefore Uber's responsibility, is owed to the community. That was mentioned, and I'd like to know what kinds of responsibilities you feel that Uber has to the community or that the drivers have.
So, I know we actively have used Uber as a group of individuals. And when drivers only drive for Uber, they drive within a certain area. So I know the driver we talked to in Boston drove in the Boston metropolitan area, whereas drivers where we're from in Philadelphia drive in the Philadelphia area. They are actively picking up individuals within those regions and providing a fulfilling service. But they should be expected to do so in a very conscientious manner. And you're almost fulfilling a role in your community by doing so honestly and doing so safely, and you're positively impacting the community in doing and serving that role. So, in itself, we view Uber as the ethical starting point, the ethical solution. The taxi cab industry is overpriced, and if you live in the suburbs, you don't have access to the taxi cab. Sorry. As opposed to Uber, where it's a very, very simple, market-driven system that is the ethical basis point. So if those drivers are participating in this system, and they are benefiting the individuals, the passengers, and they're acting safely, we feel as though they are contributing to their local community by helping people avoid drunk driving, help congestion, help reduce pollution, help reduce car ownership that's unnecessary, all of those things.
All right, I have a couple questions and a couple comments for you. First of all, right now, but as Uber, I mean, Uber, we don't like to be classified as a company that is a taxi or a cab experience. We're in the business of communicating, as you said, people and the driver. We are the platform. We are not providing the service. We don't own the cars, right? We are trying to cover a lot of aspects here, from regulatory, from the business model, and of course, the corporate behavior. This is a plan. Your suggestion is something that we are going to implement here in the US? Is this a model that could be implemented at the global level, or is it only in certain countries?
I believe this model can be instituted wherever Uber drivers are. As we said, we have to build the relationships, and once you have those relationships, you can act in an ethical manner. But also, the steps that we have laid out here, we believe are universal and can apply in all areas.
Right. Could you go back to your presentation on the map that you have?
On which slide?
I don't remember. There should be the map on the third
Oh, okay.
board
The
slide.
map of the
Yeah, where
Regulations.
Almost there.
Regulations. Yeah. Very good.
Yeah.
Right. The context in each country is different because for the US, we are trying to solve, we are competing with cabs, right? In the rest of the world, it's not the case. In Spain, for instance, in Europe, that's not the case. We're not competing because the people has other options. When you have other options, you can substitute that option, right? In Spain, for instance, you can have a cab just outside of the airport and sometimes our drivers, right? So we're trying to solve the transportation issue in Spain, while in the US, we're trying to solve another issues.
Yeah.
From your perspective and your model, how can we implement, we have drivers in multiple countries, how can we implement this model, considering that we are, targeting different issues depending on the country?
Yes, well, also following up on what Bobby said, every country does have different demands, but at the same time, ethically speaking, we want every party, whether it's the drivers, the customers, to ethically have the same experience. So there are the same problems even in Europe, that some drivers are working way too hard, are overly exhausted. So although maybe not all of the changes can be match the implications to every country, a lot of the ethical issues remain, and those need to be addressed.
Yeah, and I would like to expand for a second. I mean, right now, presently, obviously every nation has different rules regarding their taxi regulation and such stuff like that. So Uber has to build relationships with those governments and understand the status quo there before they can work with the countries and the governments to try and meet in the middle and figure out what regulation is more appropriate. We're saying right now that the status quo is unsustainable. I mean, the regulated monopoly that exists in the United States, for example, you could work with the New York City government or the San Francisco government to work out a way where taxis could get a fair deal, and as could Uber drivers. That's how it exists in the United States. In China, where they're competing with an Uber in China that's even more successful than Uber, they're gonna have to take a different tactic. So we understand you're gonna have to respond to the market in which you're operating. And like I said, privacy is different in different countries. So everything, they're gonna have to respond to demands in that particular country. France has responded differently to certain Uber demands. So Uber has to understand the landscape in which they're operating before they go in. But I feel like if you did research and understood the government intervention and what was going on, you could work with those individual governments to figure out a plan and mitigate and try and meet in the middle.
Thank you.
All right, and since we're doing a round robin, I'll just ask one question at a time. First of all, I'd like to thank you for putting us out of business. You said, for example, for New York, okay, you want to negotiate with New York. In New York, if you drive a cab, and and I'm not talking about a livery license or taxi license. I'm saying if you're the driver What kind of license do you need to drive a cab in New York City? Does anybody know?
You need more than a standard license.
Yes, you need a Class E
Yeah.
commercial license.
Yeah.
If we're gonna be movers and shakers, we can't negotiate with them. If we cared about ethics, we would make sure that everybody disclosed to their insurance company that they're using their vehicle for business, and the rates would go up about 100%, okay? As we stand now, you can go on Craigslist, and somebody that doesn't have a car can lease a car from another owner that's not registered to them. We know this. Now, I'm gonna stop here because I know we're gonna do a round robin, but if you want us to start paying or regulating insurance for a couple 100,000 drivers, nobody in the world does that, not even licensed livery. So pass it back.
Do you want to respond to that?
Yeah, I mean, we view that this is such a giant infrastructure that we've created, and right now, Uber offers discounts on gasoline that individuals purchase at like 15 to 20% based on repeat drivers. So there's a way, they have a mass amount of people that they could get lower insurance rates for them by working with insurance companies and saying, we're gonna team up with you, can you help us get the coverage we need on these individuals?
Also, I'd like to add on that, maybe in the beginning, this is why Uber is so successful, because in the beginning, Uber was the one service that was providing this kind of service before the other competitors came in. At that point, maybe that was working, but so many competitors are now entering the market, and it's very hard for Uber to differentiate itself. People are picking Lyft over Uber because they're not even looking at the quality because they don't see a difference. So if these changes were implemented, the quality would rise, and potentially the customers would see that and therefore react in that positive way.
Were you gonna ask something?
We're going to keep going
Okay.
until the time is up. Or did you have a direct follow-up to that you'd like
No,
to
that's
ask?
okay. I got a bunch of questions. I don't want to throw them away at once.
In terms of culture, you mentioned culture in terms of privacy. I'm curious about your feeling, now you talked about corporate image, which is really PR. I'm interested in understanding what you feel about our culture that needs to change, and besides what you have said about privacy. Anything?
I think that kind of goes back to the core of the business, which is where that persona that the founder originally created. So he's giving off this air of, I don't care, like I'm gonna go hard at the government, I'm gonna get what I want, and I'm gonna be kind of nasty about it. So I think it has, somewhere along the line, that has to be recognized, and then it has to trickle down, and people have to start trying to make change.
And how would you recommend that happen?
You have to communicate, so you can't say change who you are because that is completely difficult to do, but you have to articulate that this is going to impact your profitability long term. I mean, if you can speak to this in a monetary manner, it will be more, you'll have a better time discussing with this individual. So with Travis being combative, you could say that this mindset hasn't benefited us, it won't benefit us in the long term. You can't say, I think we should play nicer. You have to articulate that this isn't going to work long term, having this mindset. So I don't think you could just come and say, change the way you're speaking. It has to be mentally them recognizing that the status quo isn't working in regard to cultural behavior.
As a follow-up, do you have any statistics that have indicated any kind of harm to us in terms of reputation financially that causes you to think that our culture needs to change?
I do anecdotally. I know that in New York City, where they had an investor meeting, they showed a picture of individuals in New York City using the service and their names, and people are getting contacted that their names are being displayed at a corporate event, and they were very concerned and telling other people and reporting that it occurred and saying they were never going to use it again. So that's not a specific financial metric, but it's a perfect example of an individual getting exposed and not wanting to know people where he was going, and him saying he's never using the service again, and publishing it, where it was published in the news that they had done it.
Okay, in terms of solutions, you were talking about values for the drivers, right? How can we, what's your suggestion in terms of bonuses? Because the more money that we give to the drivers, of course, someone has to pay for it. So you're suggesting as well that we increase the rates that we are charging to our customers?
Yes. While that may seem like a short-term solution, we think that convenience is huge in this marketplace. So you want to attract drivers to come to you Lyft wants drivers, Uber wants drivers. If Uber has more drivers and it's more convenient and you turn on your app and they're 5 minutes away, you're going to go with Uber if that Lyft driver is 25. So if Uber can pay drivers a slight higher wage or a slight higher amount, those drivers will shift from Lyft to Uber and therefore increase the convenience for passengers across cities and across states. If I turn Lyft on and see my nearest driver is 30 minutes away, I'm going to check Uber and go there first. So getting the drivers to come to your service is critical. You can't just think about the cost for the passengers. You have to think about getting the right drivers, keeping your drivers, making sure it's safe, and making sure you have enough.
It doesn't matter the price then?
The price matters to a certain extent, but you can't keep competing on price entirely. I think if you introduce a customer loyalty program, people will value that. And if you also introduce a way that to keep your drivers coming back so you have a larger market share. I value personally the market share of the company over necessarily the price point right now, and I feel like by attracting drivers, they'll drive market share more than by simply undercutting price every minute.
Just going off what Matt said, we believe in the long term, the cost of bonuses or incentive, as we would like to see implemented, will be less than the possibility of having to categorize these drivers as employees and the benefits that will flow from that. So we think this small outlay, although it may be large, it will in the long term be smaller than the alternative.
If it looks like a duck, quacks like a duck, swims like a duck, it's a duck. If we start doing that, how do we keep the Department of Labor off our back that we're saying these are not employees?
Correct.
Because we're starting to reward them like employees. I mean, I'm all for customer service, and I think the loyalty program that you talked about is great, but that's my concern, is these aren't employees, so how do you manage them so that they don't put somebody's guide dog in the trunk again? Okay, so if you can help us with that, yes, we can really get this going, but how do we manage people that we say we don't manage?
And there have been court cases establishing the 11 factors that contribute to an employee versus a contractor. And we have looked into these compensation structures and realized you're not directly compensating that person. You are just, as a contractor, rewarding them for supporting your partnership. So just because you're giving them bonuses or dividends for supporting a partnership or relationship you have with that other individual doesn't directly mean you're dictating their hours or controlling necessarily buying the car for them or really controlling the resources they're employing.
My question, and this is a question where I'm asking for help. Would it be better if we sold franchises? And then they would, just like you own a Subway snacks or sandwich shop, right? If you want to keep that sign that says Subway on your door, you've got a certain amount of things you must do and follow in quality.
Mm-hmm.
So basically, we're selling the right to drive for us. And now you are your own company. Would that be feasible? Because again, how do we control people we say don't work for us?
I mean, I think of going back to like the market-merchant relationship. If you had a market where you had a regulation that you couldn't trade on our market unless you had a certain certification. You're regulating the individuals that operate in your market, but that doesn't mean you're employing them. You're just trying to keep the credibility of the thing you're doing. So I don't think creating regulation for these individuals when they come and work for you, or come and use your service.
I mean, it's the perception.
Yes, so I understand, but what I'm trying to articulate is that these individuals that are, just because you're asking them to do certain things, doesn't mean you're necessarily employing them. It just means that you have certain requirements that you would like to uphold for the infrastructure you are providing. So I think there's a lot of examples of that in other systems across the world, where there are marketplaces that have been created, like eBay, where you say, if you get negative reviews on eBay, you're not going to sell on eBay anymore. But that doesn't mean you work for eBay. You are an independent merchant that is selling a product that you have on eBay. So it's not necessarily, and it's a partnership where if you do better on eBay, they change the percentage that you get from eBay. And also they can kick you off eBay and regulate your reviews on eBay. And I'm not necessarily employed by eBay. I have a relationship, a partnership with eBay, and I'm using the market they offer.
I'm trying to get a handle on what you're asking us as a board as it relates to ethical impact. And I'm wondering if you could pull out for me the top 3 to 5 issues that address ethical impact that you are asking us to change or do differently.
say the security and safety of passengers and customers.
I would say being transparent with your drivers.
The privacy of those passengers that get picked up.
I mean, we recognize that you have the starting point for...
Is that
sorry.
it?
No, sorry. I was,
So what other,
okay, I think,
Well, I think also ensuring that the drivers are compensated both fairly and so that when they are happy, that will trickle down to the customers, which will ultimately trickle down to the investors' perception. So treating them either whether it's increasing that percentage that they receive of compensation from each ride or just ensuring that they're reimbursed for their expenses, things like that. The drivers do matter.
okay, anything else?
I mean, from an ethics standpoint, you realize we went into this totally unlicensed and new. So that's really not a top concern. Like you said, we changed the rules. We didn't apply for any licenses. I mean, you know, you just can't, and I agree, something's got to be done with the other side, because how licenses are issued is not ethical. It's who you know, and you may wait forever, and you may have to do payoffs to get a license to have a livery companies to drive to have limousine services. And of course, you're right, the taxi and cab licensing in cities and states is as corrupt as anything. But how do we make a profit? We're going to give the drivers more money. We're going to help them all get insurance. We're going to train them. If we do all of that, we're going to cost a heck of a lot more than the average taxi cab, aren't we? And that's what I meant by my very snide comment at the beginning, saying thank you for putting us out of business. If we give more than what limo services and taxi services, how are we competitive now?
because taxi services have to pay $750,000 for the right to work. I mean, the medallions are $750,000. That fee is not even associated with an Uber driver. I mean, you can operate out of this highly regulated system where the market determines prices, and you would still be able to compete.
Okay, roughly how many drivers do we have worldwide?
I would have to research that. I don't know exactly how many right now. Yeah.
And do you know how long it takes to apply to be an Uber driver?
We actually asked one of the Uber drivers, and he said it was very quickly, within a matter of a couple weeks, he said.
It's 4 minutes to apply.
Oh, to apply, yes, but the whole process.
They're going to tell all that background,
Yes.
but it's, so to be able to provide, all of that for hundreds of thousands of drivers, and they want hundreds of thousands more, right? Because that's why we're now giving deals and helping, people lease cars. It's going to be a lot more than $750,000 medallion fee. I just can't see how we can do Uber utopia like that.
In our remaining time, perhaps, do you have another question?
No.
All right. Anything else anyone feels they need to say? Okay. Now we're going to switch roles, and we're going to give you feedback for your next opportunity to do all of this in 10 minutes. And I'll start. Be sure to introduce your team at the beginning by name. I don't remember that you did. You did to me outside. Did you do it up here?
Yeah, we did.
Angel, sorry, went over my head. Okay, that's good, because I didn't get that. I would really recommend that you think about replacing on your slide the public image one and put reputation. I think you want to distinguish yourself from dealing with some of their PR problems and look more to culture and more to reputation and think about that. I think it would be more in keeping certainly with what we're talking about. The issue of what you gave in your answer to the top 3 to 5 ethical issues, keep in mind that your 10 minutes is only about ethics. we brought you back, when you come back tomorrow, you'll be brought back because of the board's desire to know more about your ethical piece. So think about how you pull that together, because what you did, which was, good, you covered a lot of ground. And it's the ethical implications that you will need to be the clearest and sharpest on tomorrow, right? So that was harder for me to see in the course of the 30 minutes, and that's why I asked the question. Find a way, in my view, to pull very clearly the ethical implications and your addressing of them in that tomorrow, because the other pieces of it the good questions Phil was asking, many of them aren't necessarily part of an ethical aspect, correct? I mean, what of what they did needs to be, in your view, part of the 10 minutes that's ethics only focused?
Okay, well, yeah, you're right. Ethics is difficult to define because everything flips back to ethics, but I think what you're saying is true, that it needed to be specified and really deal with the ethical aspects and not keep intertwining it with the business and customer service and things like that.
It was fine to do that for this one. It's not fine to do that, in my view, tomorrow, because you will cheat yourself out of what's expected, which is the board has brought you back to talk about the ethics part of it. So some of the good questions Phil raised, while they're important ones to answer if you ever take this subject, to the next level and do anything with it, for tomorrow, I think you really can avoid some of the things that might be more problematic. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And focus on being really compelling. You've got some really good things in terms of the safety, the transparency, the privacy, and the issue of compensation. You could talk about that in terms of fair treatment as well. So I think all of that is good, but I think you did a very good job with a hard subject, but I think that we're talking tomorrow, and that's what our purpose is, to help you prepare for that, about how do you take that and make it really compellingly clear what you're asking the board to do as it relates to ethical implications.
I think that you try to cover a lot of ground, because each one of the aspects that you mentioned is a huge problem for you, right? It's not a simple solution. You need to focus on that one that you feel that you're strong. Meaning, if you are thinking that from the ethical perspective, that the privacy is a big issue, don't get in the discussion of the price. Don't get in the discussion if you have permits or not. That's the main problem that you are trying to resolve. If you feel strong that, go for it. Because each one of the topics could be seen from different perspectives, and you can have different discussions, arguments, pros, cons. Pick one first, and please provide a solution. Your implementation, what it means in terms of revenue, what it means in terms of the service to the customer, what it means for me as a company. Okay, if you avoid these transparency issues, for instance, what is going to happen with my company? You will prevent some, complaints in the media, maybe. You will lawsuits, issues. You need to focus in one topic, and then you can expand to the rest of the problems, or you can show how this issue, resolving this issue, will benefit the rest of the aspects in your organization.
Right, and to second what Carlos said, take for example Volkswagen, right? They weren't transparent. They fudged all the emission tests. And the good name of Volkswagen, it's been around forever, people are doubting it now because they falsified reports. You think you're driving this car that's not polluting, and it's polluting, and they just decided they weren't going to tell us. But I also want to say that I thought you took on a very hard, controversial topic that is a pet project of the Department of Labor. They're going to keep sticking their nose into it whether they're invited or not. And I think you all did a great job, but I think that because you try to cover so many topics, that kind of led me astray, and I apologize for all the
No.
business
I think,
questions.
no, but I think those were good things for you to hear, and they're very appropriate for today. I just didn't want you to go off and try to answer some of those tomorrow if they're not ethical.
Okay.
And I think you all have a great career in soap operas. You are all very good-looking, intelligent people. So, whatever you choose, you were very impressive at.
I think the presentations were well done. You don't ever have to say, "I'm sorry." You know?
Yeah.
We don't know what you're going to say next.
Right.
So if that happens tomorrow, and of course, there's a lot of pressure. But you all have, you're poised, you have a presence about you. If something should happen tomorrow, you know, you have lived this subject. Allow whatever, maybe it isn't even scripted, allow what occurs to you. Because you don't ever want to flag.
Right. It's better to run with it.
Yeah.
Have fun with it.
Right.
Because we want you to be comfortable. And if you were being paid to do this, you wouldn't ever want the client to think that you weren't as worthy as you are of his or her trust in you. And whenever we're rattled, which is human, we just need to remember that we belong there and we know something we can say, and they won't know that we've just missed something. But I think the way you presented, I think your slides are great. Now you won't have those tomorrow, but I think you did a really good job with that. Do you have anything else you want to add?
No, good.
Is there anything you want to ask us that didn't make sense about what we asked, or that you think you want more information on?
I mean, you said for this format, this presentation was appropriate, the scope of it. Tomorrow, I guess, you should pick one area. Do you want us
No,
to?
you don't have to just pick one area, but I'll read the 10 minutes again. I mean, I'll read the 10 minutes for you. You may have seen it before. The 10-minute presentation will be read to you tomorrow. This script is you have been called back by the company you gave your full presentation to yesterday for a second visit. They have asked you to speak only about the ethical aspects of the problem and to explain why your solution successfully handles ethical issues. You will have 10 minutes. There will be no Q&A. You may not use slides or video. So there's sometimes, and I've done this for several years, there's a temptation if you've spent a lot of time on your presentation to try to take 2 or 3 of those 10 minutes and set the stage for the whole big picture.
Yep.
Use every bit of your 10 minutes to address what, if you were being paid by a board to come back and they wanted to only know the ethical piece, that's what you need to give them. And you have a lot of stuff in your presentation. I think, if I'm not mistaken, what we're saying is, okay, choose what you're going to talk about tomorrow and really give us, whoever is judging, the benefit of the issue and the solution.
Right. If you think 10 minutes, 3 topics, you have regulatory, corporate behavior, and business model. It's not enough 10 minutes. So you have you have to select what are the topics that you feel comfortable with.
And you gave us your answer. You said, and you obviously choose this. You don't have to. You're not wedded to this. But your answer to the question was security, safety of passengers and customers, transparency with the driver, privacy, and then you said ensure drivers are compensated fairly. I think it's probably a good point. But 3 is probably all you might be able to do justice to. Does that feel, I mean, what do you think?
No, that makes sense.
Yes.
And the danger, and you're all bright and probably overachievers. The danger in something like that is you want to do more. And the problem is if you do more and you don't do the ethical aspect really well, then you'll be marked down for it. Because that's
It'll leave a
just,
lasting impression.
yeah.
That's, in a nutshell, you're right. I mean, long before I was in ethics and compliance, I was an employee relations manager. Tomorrow's going to be heart-to-heart, one-on-one. Sell it from the heart.
And you've got the preparation that, no one's going to ask you any questions. So it doesn't matter tonight to research how many Uber drivers, although I'm really interested in knowing how many. I'll have to Google it myself, but, It's irrelevant to tomorrow if it doesn't fit
Yeah.
what it
Well,
is you were talking about.
Okay.
You guys did great.
All right.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very
Thanks for
much.
your expert help with
Oh gosh,
Not
I
that I can do this without her, because
Nice
I'm
this was
meeting
eating
you.
you off, so I think it is.
Thank you.
Things that.
To that question, nobody knows how
I don't
many
want the
users.